Welcome back to Seattle Central. It's great that you're making the return trip, and we're so happy to have you. Let's give her a big hand.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Seattle Central, for having me back to talk to you today. It's just, every time I come back to this campus, I'm just reminded and reinvigorated anew about how amazing of a community this campus is. And I love it here, and it's always exciting to be able to come back and talk with everybody. I'm going to structure my talk today to kind of front load some of my transitions from Seattle Central to the University of Washington, because I imagine a number of you are thinking along those lines, and some particular skills that I developed in those transitions. I'm going to talk a bit about my research. I'll talk about different aspects of social justice that I'm working on that in many ways were the foundational aspects of were laid down while I was at Seattle Central, and then kind of end with some fun ways to approach science. And then I hope to get through that fairly quickly so that we can really open this up to a nice Q&A, because I think it's most useful for you to ask me questions about stuff that you can't find on the internet from the back and forth dialogue. There are some seats down in the front and along the side, so feel free to come in and sit down and do what you want. The talk title is From Central to Harvard, A Graduate's Journey to Success, and this was a wonderful title put together by Seattle Central's PR office. And so as I sat down to start working on this, I realized that success is tricky. And I thought of the words of my father, who sadly passed away 8 years ago, and he would always say to me, you know, success is not a destination. It's a path we walk each day. Win or lose, it's how we use each breath along the way. And I think that this is an essential lesson because what we have is the here and now. We always have the here and now. And many of the decisions I made were about the here and now that manifested in wonderful opportunities for me moving forward, but that's not necessarily why I did them at the time that I started them. So, related to that, it's not as though there's some kind of straight pathway from Seattle Central to whatever destination you think you are aiming for. It ends up not being a straight line at all. It's much more of a winding road. And there are times where I took breaks or went on detours or slowed down or sped up according to what was going on in my life and in the world at that time. And I really, really value the path I've taken because all of those things that seemed like they were off target actually ended up helping me build skills and relationships and networks that became absolutely essential to the things that I'm doing today. So we're going to kind of walk through some of those. As Pete very kindly mentioned, I started at Seattle Central in the 90s, which is kind of weird to think about. And I started as a running start student. So I was coming over every day from Vashon Island because I wanted to take classes in anthropology and sociology and astronomy. And in a small rural environment, our high school didn't offer those kinds of things. And I also came from a socioeconomic background where I knew unequivocally that my parents could not help me in any way pay for school. And the Running Start program was a way to get 2 years of college for free. And that was absolutely essential for launching me in my educational career. And I was able to do that by taking advantage of two key resources. I'd take up too many hours if I tried to list all of the resources at Seattle Central. But two that I found especially instrumental at a bureaucratic level were the Career Center. So I would actually go to the Career Center and whatever paperwork they were handing out, I think all of it's online now, how to write a resume, how to write a cover letter, how to do an interview, how to talk to people, how to find jobs, how to find anything, how to figure out what aspects of your personality, values, and skills are well-fitted and well-suited to certain kinds of careers, and what courses you can take during your educational training to prepare for those careers. I got a ton of information from the Career Center, and because I'm a pack rat, I actually still have a lot of those things in a binder from my time at Seattle Central. Organization is going to come up again later. I also was on a first-name basis with all of the staff in the scholarship office. I went there and I read about every scholarship I applied, $500, $1,000, $1,500, whatever I could. When I was getting ready to transfer to the University of Washington, I looked at any kind of funding that was possibly available, and I applied. I applied for so many things, and I only got a small portion of them. But it added up. And when you add up the amount of time you spend working on scholarships and fellowships and turn it into like an hourly wage, it actually isn't too shabby. And once you start applying to some scholarships, a lot of those biographical essays or goal-oriented essays, they actually can be repurposed and recycled and reused for other scholarships. So front-loading effort can have continuous payoffs. I got my first major grant as a Ph.D. based on something I had written my second year in graduate school that I had expanded and elaborated. So doing your best work early on can actually have huge payoffs years later. So I transferred to the University of Washington in 97 through 99, and very similarly there, they knew me at the Office of Merit Scholarships, and I applied for every single thing I could possibly be eligible for. And in my coursework, I was able to take a class at the University of Washington, and I don't know if this is still offered, but I do know that there are still opportunities for students to work with infant primates. There's an infant primate research lab there, and we measured their growth and their development, their weight gain, how their skeleton was developing, and we were able to do x-rays to actually look at how their skeletons were developing, who was developing faster or slower, and do what became primary research as an undergraduate. And, I mean, it's not hard. You start spending time around baby monkeys, and you're like, I want to study this forever. And ever. Because they're adorable and interesting. And so I knew that I wanted to go on to grad school, but I wasn't quite ready. So because I had done Running Start and started when I was in high school, I actually graduated from the University of Washington when I was still 19 years old. And my dad was really adamant that I should immediately apply to grad school, that I would lose momentum, that I couldn't take a break from school or else I'd never go back. And I was just as adamant that I needed to take a break, that I couldn't go to grad school before I could go to happy hour. And I imagine, being in the office with other graduate students and they're all going out to hang out and socialize, and I'm like, hurry guys, see you later. And I said, no, I need a break. I've been going really hard, I've been focusing on school, and I'm just tired. And so I'm gonna get a job. And because I had done that internship with baby monkeys as a class, I applied and became a nursery tech at the Primate Center at the University of Washington. And then I was promoted into a research technician. And I spent 2 years learning how to do animal handling and animal treatments and growth and health assessments and sedations and any number of veterinary technician skills that then I actually used 6 years later when I was using my dissertation. And it allowed me to make my dissertation much cheaper because I didn't have to pay staff to do something that I had wanted to do before I'd gone to grad school. So this is something that I wouldn't have thought that I would necessarily have used those skills, but I ended up having skills that became essential. So I worked at the Washington National Primate Research Center, and I paid attention to my employee handbook, and I read the fine print. And I found out that because I would work there for 6 months at that time, I was eligible to enroll in classes for free. And so I started to take extra classes that I hadn't gotten to take when I was an undergraduate, as I wanted to graduate before I'd accrued too much debt. And one of the classes I signed up for was the International Field Study Program. We'll come back to that in the next slide because it has some details. I went and hung out with monkeys in the lab in Indonesia. Talk about that in the next slide. And that was a turning point for me. It was 2 years since I'd been in school, and I got to Indonesia, and I saw monkeys out in the wild. And I was like, I'm ready to go back to school. And I was so eager that when I came back, I wanted to have more free time. So I quit my primary job at the Primate Center, and I worked part-time at the farmer's market down in downtown, the Pike Place Market. And while I was there, I was selling photography, I was selling photos, and my job required me to talk to everyone. People from all over the world, of all different ages, of different faiths and races and socioeconomic classes, and people that were traveling through or walking through from homeless to millionaires. And I developed my ability to interact interact with a variety of people. And that has been absolutely essential as a professor. I teach a variety of students. As a researcher, I talk to a variety of audiences. I'm talking to you guys here today. I'll give grand rounds at a children's hospital. I'll talk to dairy scientists. And building up that skill set of ease of communication with a diversity of people, which started here at Seattle Central, was emphasized and enhanced by this job that I had selected. So when I was in Indonesia, she was here at the 9 o'clock talk. She's one of the professors here at Seattle Central. I actually went with Carissa Leeson. So anybody here taking a class from Carissa? All right, yeah. So she's still a quite good friend of mine. We got to go and hang out on this little island in Indonesia, and we watched monkeys. And my research project was looking at the mother-infant dynamic within this group of long-tailed macaques on this little island. And it was a transformative experience. And I'd saved up all of my vacation time from my job so that I got paid while I was there and didn't have to pay for the class credits because I had planned according to the employee handbook. When I'd been a student at the University of Washington, these aren't in perfect order. I came back from Indonesia and I applied to go to UCLA to do my graduate work in anthropology. And the work I wanted to do was actually shaped by papers that I had read as an undergraduate. So I'm going to come back to that. So these are The Meanings of Weaning by Phyllis Lee and Maternal Condition and the Quality of Maternal Care in Vervet Monkeys by Lynn Fairbanks. These two papers were absolutely the most important in shaping my intellectual thinking about how mothers and infants interact. Okay? How does a mother's environment influence how she takes care of her baby? How does a mother's health affect how she takes care of the baby? These are areas that have a rich literature in psychology and anthropology and biology. And I actually still have the original articles that I had read and written in the margins. That's great. It's really interesting to know about how they provide behavioral care. But what do we know about their milk? How does their health affect their milk? How does their diet affect their milk? How does their age affect milk? And I went to find scholarly articles on that, and there weren't any. And I wanted to know. I went to my advisor, and I said, I want to study milk. She's like, oh, I don't think you can milk a monkey. I was like, I think I can. And I went to another mentor, and they were like, no, you won't find anything interesting. I was like, I think I could. I want to find out. I want to know the answer to this question. It's not in any textbook. It's not in any journal article. It doesn't exist. This information does not exist in the world, and I want to know the answer, so I'm going to work on answering it. And it turns out that milk's really interesting. So here's the rhesus monkeys that I get to work with. Now, I say milk. You guys think about what you put on your cereal or cheese or ice cream, which is very understandable. But because milk is so ubiquitous in our environment, we tend to forget that it's fundamentally the equivalent of a magic potion. So think about a potion that has all the calories you need, all the vitamins, all the minerals. It has immune factors, antibodies, to protect you when you're sick and before your immune system's developed. It has hormones that influence how your body regulates itself. It has water to hydrate you. It has everything that your body needs to sustain itself and grow. That's milk. But because it's ubiquitous in our environment and you can buy it anywhere, we tend to forget that it has been evolving for 300 million years. It first arose before dinosaurs walked the earth. And over the millennia of natural selection shaping what is in milk and what it does, we have a diversity of lactation strategies among mammals living today. Mother's milk allows mammals to rear their young in environments that those young could not survive in otherwise. Like on ice floes with seals. There's nothing for those seals to eat other than the milk their mothers produce. I've listed all these things that milk has. It's essential. And something that's so essential about, we hear all the time from doctors, from the media, from Michelle Obama, that diet is so important for our health. But we still don't systematically know about the first food we've evolved to consume. So think about, it's a food, it's a medicine, it's a signal, and these are all interacting. But we still know very little, and I'll show you that. We don't know everything that's in milk. I can't tell you the list of ingredients in mother's milk. We still haven't articulated all of them. We don't know how all of them get into the milk, and we really don't know what they do systematically when they're ingested by the infant. For any mammal, including humans. If you look at the number of academic research articles addressing issues about pregnancy, we are talking about many times more than we know about lactation. And when you look at the number of articles about human breast milk, it's hardly anything. This should make you angry. Because I just told you that milk is this miraculous, magical substance that is essential for organizing us when we're young, with lifelong implications for our health. We need to know about this product, and my research program is directly addressing deficits in our understanding about mother's milk. And we need to know, because some of the biggest health challenges facing the world today are things that can be minimized or treated by constituents in mother's milk. Let's just think about these. For the first time in the history of humanity, more people's health is threatened by being overweight and obese than by being underweight and malnourished. Breast milk, compared to artificial breast milk, like formula, that prevents risks of development of obesity and of being overweight. Globally, 1.5 million children under the age of 5 will die of diarrhea. Mother's milk has constituents that fight the rotaviruses that are one of the leading causes of infant diarrhea. And many children will be born preterm. And for these very vulnerable preemie infants in neonatal intensive care units, it's been systematically shown that breast milk is better at protecting their health and helping them to thrive than anything else. In recent years, it's also been shown that there are stem cells in breast milk, and that there are factors in breast milk that kill the HIV virus. We need to understand a lot more about breast milk. Because right now we know about its superfunction when we come to dairy science. We know about the dysfunction of the mammary gland. There's a lot of research on breast cancer and mammary gland biology, but not dysfunction of the mammary gland. We know about pseudo-functional substitutes by comparing breast milk and formula feeding, but formula is pretty standardized, and it turns out that mother's milk varies dramatically across individuals in ways that we still don't understand. We fundamentally know relatively little about the function of milk, the behavioral biology that natural selection has shaped. We can predict that the milk that is supporting that development is also potentially different. And we're finding information that supports that. Most recently, regarding this area of research, we published a paper with 2.5 million lactations from 1.5 million cows. I'm never going to have a sample size like that again, so I say it as much as possible. And we found that heifers that had gestated a daughter produced significantly more milk across lactation than had heifers that gestated a son. And we're now trying to understand what are the hormonal signals from those fetuses that are affecting how the mammary gland develops to produce milk after that calf is born. And I was really excited because the New York Times did art for our paper. In the course of my research, I've been able to go around the world. I've worked in Puerto Rico, I've worked in Indonesia, I've worked with primates that are in these large outdoor corrals in California, in the Central Valley. And I've gotten to do a lot of laboratory work in Washington, D.C. at the National Zoo. It's really cool because one of the labs is on display for the zoo goers, and you're actually behind glass. And people tap on that glass a lot when you're trying to work. And you're like, they don't tell you don't tap on the glass for the researchers like they do for the animals. People are like, what are you doing in there? It's like, read the sign. having to expand skills or develop skills that I didn't already have. So organization becomes essential. Get organized early, because as you move forward, you'll just have more stuff to organize. So pay the cost of organizing when there's less to organize. I learned statistics. If you have a chance, learn statistics. Learn how to calculate probabilistic theory, and you will be a much better consumer of science in the news and information that you get as you make decisions about whether or not there's global warming or whether or not vaccines are safe and effective. Right? We can misuse science when we don't understand the science underlying the messaging. I had to learn about nutrition because I'm interested in mother's milk. It's the first food that a baby consumes. I've expanded my public speaking exponentially. I do research, so there's a lot that goes into how to do research, so that should actually probably be a bigger font. And grant writing, learn to write. Writing is a muscle. Practice, 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 practice. Write as much as you can, because it just gets easier the more you write. I had avoided some of the quote-unquote harder sciences, because I was intimidated by them as an early career student. But I ended up having to learn how to do a whole bunch of very complicated chemistry in order to look at the nutritional content in mother's breast milk. And after I got done doing my dissertation work, I became a postdoc, which is comparable to a medical residency after you go through med school. And it's kind of an elaborated name for being a poorly paid intern. So one thing to think about, this is a time when we lose a lot of brilliant scientists, because the postdoc period is a very hard time to fund. It's very hard to stay on a career trajectory in academia post-Ph.D. before you get a faculty position. It's a period of economic hardship, and one of the ways that we can be most successful during this period is by positioning ourselves very effectively in grad school and in undergrad. Now, I'm talking as an academic, and some of you in here might be interested in being academics. You might be interested in any number of career paths. How you succeed at the back end is going to be very dramatically influenced by what you put in on the front end. Right? So you shouldn't be at the end of something trying to figure out the next step. You should be planning 5 steps ahead. So plan early, plan often. Talk to mentors, talk to counselors, talk to teachers, go to office hours. It will be so important as you move forward. I was able to convince the National Science Foundation to give me a really big grant, which was very unexpected because funding is really hard and it takes a lot of applications. So that's something else to think about. Whenever you hit a setback or a rejection or a quote-unquote failure, you have to understand that me, as a professor, I would characterize about 70% of the stuff I do ends in failure. Right? A paper submitted for publication, a grant submitted to fund research, application to a job, we're applying for stuff continuously, and we're continuously getting told no. Success isn't not failing. It's not letting failure stop you from continuing to try. Just fundamentally, keep that in mind and work on staying resilient in the face of setbacks. So I know this because I worked really hard on my grant writing when I was in grad school, and that was the grant that ended up getting funded once I had my Ph.D. And so I've been able to expand a very large research program looking at mother's milk. So I look at the variation in mother's milk from mother to mother, so things like hormones, nutrients. Turns out there's bacteria in milk that do really good things and are amazing, and immune factors. And I look at what about the mother health or diet or environment explains that variation, and what that variation means in terms of consequences for the infant's development. And not just their growth, but their behavior. Right? We can behave because we get energy from the food we eat. Well, the same thing's true for babies. They're able to explore their environment and play and make friends and do everything it takes to be a baby monkey because of their mother's milk. And most recently, in November, our paper was covered in the New York Times talking about how hormones and energy in mother's milk shape infant confidence and playfulness. I worked very hard as a scholar to make sure that the research I conduct is not just published in academic journals. I make sure I talk to journalists. I write a blog called Mammal Suck Milk, where I can talk about the research I do, because it's entirely funded by taxpayers. Right? Taxpayers are funding the research that I'm finding out new things about milk. Part of the social contract of being a scientist and a researcher means not just telling other scientists about my work. It's about telling it to people that use that science to make decisions, whether it be mothers weighing breastfeeding, formula feeding decisions, or Congress members that are voting on whether or not we need paid maternity leave. Spoiler alert, we do. And that science is only as powerful as it is communicating to people that are making decisions based on that science. This is why writing and public speaking become an essential tool in the scientist's toolkit. And now I get to be junior faculty at Harvard, which I would never have expected in my wildest dreams. And it's sometimes overwhelming to be junior faculty at an elite institution where you have to be doing lots and lots and lots of things. But it also provides a lot of opportunities to communicate science, to create more equal opportunity for a diversity of students in higher education. And it also gives us opportunities to engage in social justice efforts, frankly. So as a scholar in academia, I do research, I get to do teaching, which is fantastic. I do service, which is working with other scholars in professional societies like the American Society of Primatologists or the International Society for Research in Human Milk and Lactation. And I also do a lot of outreach. And embedded in that service and outreach are two the things I'm going to talk about at the end of this talk right now. One has to do with improving social justice within academia, and the other has to do with finding new and fun ways to teach about the science that we do. In July, with 3 colleagues whose pictures I'll show you on the next slide, we published a paper called the SAFE Survey. It was a survey of academic field experiences, where we asked people that had gone to do field work in biology, archaeology, anthropology, geology, climate scientists, cultural anthropology. We asked anybody that wanted to take our survey that did field work was invited to take our survey. And we asked them about their experiences with sexual harassment and sexual assault at field sites. We're seeing frequently in the news that many women are disappearing from the science pipeline, that they go into grad school in equal numbers with male students, but they don't progress along a career trajectory in equal numbers. And in that discussion, there has never been the consideration of differences in lived experiences of sexual assault and sexual harassment within the sciences. We know that there are a number of obstacles and barriers that are hurting a number of people from participating fully in STEM. It has traditionally been the space of rich, heterosexual, white men, frankly. And we were able to look at the experiences of women and men in terms of sexual harassment and sexual assault, in part because among students, women, particularly white women, have been most successful at entering academia. We don't have enough people of color and enough people of various sexual orientations or gender identities or veteran status or different abilities to be able to ask them questions about this without risking their anonymity, because it still remains a non-inclusive, non-equal opportunity space. But many of us are working very, very hard to make academia more welcoming to everyone, because we need a diversity of minds provided with equal opportunity in order to tackle the biggest scientific challenges that we're facing. So we did this study, and my colleagues were Kate Clancy, Dr. Robin Nelson, and Dr. Julian Rutherford, and we all did this as pre-tenure women. When we launched this study, several of our colleagues warned us not to. They said, "Oh, you don't want to tangle with that before you have tenure. That's very risky. lot of people are going to be very upset that you're doing this research, that you're talking about this very unmentionable topic. And we talked about it. We talked about the risks involved. We talked about how it could hurt our careers, how it could hurt our standing in our community, potentially. And we all agreed, this is too important of a conversation to delay. We need to be addressing this, and we need to take the first step. And this study was the first step. Each one of these dots is a person that answered our survey. Blue are men, red are women. We had people that identify as other genders, but in too small of numbers to show without risking their anonymity. So I'm only presenting all men and women today. The space that they have in this figure is in proportion to their response to the survey. So here's all the men and all the women. And we asked them if they had experienced inappropriate sexual comments at any time that they were at their most recent or most notable field site. There's a lot of dots in those squares. Then we asked them if they had received unwanted physical contact, which is sexual assault. And there's a lot of dots in those squares. These are people's lived experiences. These are people's barriers to achieving everything that they want in their chosen field. And even more sadly, we found out that very few of them knew of ways to report what had happened to them. Very few of them had encountered a sexual harassment policy at any of their field sites. And when some of them spoke up, very few of them were satisfied with the outcome of having told someone. This is a failure of our disciplines in not protecting what turns out to be overwhelmingly trainees when they experience these events. Our most vulnerable members of our community are the ones that are most likely to be targeted for these inappropriate behaviors. And it happens to both men and women, not just women. But who it's coming from is very different. Men experience sexual harassment and sexual assault from their peers, whereas women experience it from people within the research team who have power over them. When we started our study, people told us it doesn't happen. And then when it does happen, I had one person actually tell me both of these things, it doesn't happen. But when it does happen, it's not from inside the research team. It's from going to a different culture where people think different things, or there were misunderstandings, or it's just cultural differences. It's not from inside the research team. This is a very convenient myth to propagate because it allows us to not address the fact that a majority of these experiences are coming from inside the research team, and for the women that responded to our survey, a majority of them were coming from people that had power over them in the hierarchy of the field site. Power over their career, power over their research. Since this study has come out, it has been viewed nearly 60,000 times. It has been covered in dozens of media outlets. It was the most shared PLOS One article of 2014. And of all the scientific articles published in 2014, in terms of the traffic and discussion and media coverage, it's number 38. And we published it halfway through the year. I can tell you right now that because we published this study, more field sites have codes of conduct and sexual harassment policies. More deans are requiring their researchers to protect and report what is happening to their trainees. And a number of other fields are implementing surveys very similar to ours. And not just experiences in the field, experiences in the lab, in the classroom, in the office, at the conference. And not just the experiences of men and women. They're addressing a number of marginalizing microaggressions and other kinds of chilling climate and workplace hostility that are creating barriers for diversity of scholars that want to be academics and scientists. This is part of a broader discussion that's happening throughout our society. We were very lucky that when our study was published was right after the White House had announced their "one is too many" campaign. Very fortunately. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that my motivation to speak up and take on these power structures and these challenges, the seed of that nurtured and developed here in the corridors of Seattle Central. This is an exceptionally wonderful community for building motivation and understanding and working together. So I have to tell you how important my time here at Seattle Central has been, and I hope that it shapes you guys in just as wonderful of ways. So that's kind of some of the sad stuff we're doing. So let's end with some of the positive stuff that we're doing. Well, that's positive too, but happy positive. I mentioned I have a blog, and it gets quite a lot of traffic, but there's one time of the year that it gets the most traffic, and that's in March, because we created Mammal March Madness, and it piggybacks on NCAA Basketball March Madness, where we talk about many species of mammals and how they would match up in a one-on-one fight. What kind of weaponry do they have? What kind of armor do they have? What kind of fight style do they have? What ecologies are they good in? Right? These are fundamentally adaptations shaped by natural selection. So it gives us a chance to talk about how has natural selection shaped species to live in their world. So we start out with, we do this for serious, okay? It started out because BuzzFeed had an Animal March Madness, and I printed it out in my lab. I was like, oh, lab building activity. And it had 16 species, and it was, which one is the cutest? No. 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 We did it the first year. I did it by myself on my blog. I figured my mom would follow, but actually hundreds of people started playing. And we got more elaborate last year, and I invited some colleagues, an insect biologist, a fish biologist, and a paleoanthropologist to help be lead organizers with me. And we have divisions that are organized around things like marine mammals, or fossil mammals, or social mammals, or the who and the what now, right? So these are species that most people don't know what they are, like, who knows what a binturong is? It's super awesome. You should totally check it out. They smell like popcorn. Seriously. And in each of these, you'll notice there's a non-mammal species. I had somebody email me, and they're like, army ants aren't a mammal. Like, I know. We're making it more inclusive by including other species. And what we do is we send out the bracket on the blog 2 weeks ahead of time so people can do all their research, and people play. A lot of people play this game, right? I have museum staff playing this game. I have community college biology. I have parents playing with their kids at home that try and bribe me into letting the species that their kid really loves win. I've offered like chocolate if I'd let reindeer beat moose. No. And what we do is we live tweet the battles, like as like radio play-by-play. And we actually cite articles, like established science articles to explain what's happening. I end up knowing so much more about biology because I did this. I did this as a Friday, it started as a Friday afternoon lab activity and has exploded into something that kind of takes over my March, but allows me to read broadly in the literature, think about complex adaptations, interact with scientists and moms and dads and museum curators and people around the world. And I never thought it would turn into this. I never thought that people would be emailing me and saying, we want to partner with you to create like actual games. And it was just something that I was like, this seems like a really fun thing to do, to imagine animal battles. And yet it's turned into something that is one of the highlights of my year. So if you want to follow me on Twitter. I'm at mammals_suck. And my love for these kinds of creative, outside-the-box, imaginative ideas and the fun of learning was first established here at Seattle Central. So in some ways, every student should be able to have time to come to Seattle Central to gain what seems to be uniquely present at this campus. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions. saying, what do you do for outreach? What are the broader implications of your work, and how are you improving the lives of people through it? Question?
So I was just curious, you're talking about the process of making academia like more exclusive space.
Yeah.
And how opportunities to do that.
So one of the ways are that we're starting a lot of conversations about the barriers and bad experiences that people are having to help bring people together to affect change. So we have focus groups or outreach groups or panels with faculty, with grad students, and we talk about that biases, explicit and implicit biases, are still very much operating among faculty. And we confront that and talk about how that manifests, how people say things off the cuff that's actually incredibly hurtful. We talk to faculty about this is a problem. And it's tricky. People don't like to be told that they're coming off as racist and sexist and, disparaging toward people of faith. And so you have to finesse some of those conversations where you talk about things like, these are uncomfortable things. The power of privilege is that the people that have it are blind to it. When you say, that's a pretty privileged statement, they're like, oh, And you have to be like, no. Just because something makes you uncomfortable doesn't mean you're being attacked. And we all have to have a growth attitude where we recognize that we all have room to grow. And those of us that have gatekeeper roles and positions of power, I would argue, have the greatest obligation to self-interrogate and make sure that we are continuing to grow, that we are serving the needs of all of our students, not just the ones that look like us. This one and then this one.
I remember you mentioned that you were concerned about getting out of college before your debt got too high. How do you feel now with the tuition rates and college student debt becoming greater than the credit card debt in this country?
I think it's a huge problem. I think it's a fundamental huge problem. I think we're going to see some. I'm not an economist, but I just don't understand how anybody can look at this situation and not see it as catastrophic. Period. We should not have the youngest people in our population starting their careers burdened by unimaginable debt. Right? It's going to just gum up every aspect of our economy, and we're seeing that actually happening. I was so thrilled to see President Obama announce the Free Community College Initiative, and I hope and encourage everybody to contact, you guys are in Seattle, so Jim McDermott obviously is going to be supporting this, so you don't have to email him, but email all the others. Email the leadership of the GOP, email, anybody to talk about how essential making education affordable is to the health, be it public health, professional health, economic health, whatever, of our society. And we need to fix it. We need to fix it collectively. And I do not know myself exactly what immediate small-scale steps each of us can take beyond communicating this need broadly to our elected officials and the relatives of ours at home that think it's stupid. Because it's not. It's really smart, right? So some of the most uncomfortable conversations we have are with people we love, right? Because it's conversational. It's hard, but change happens in small steps. Question right here. Yeah.
Thank you for your research on harassment.
Oh,
It's amazing. I'm really proud of you. I don't know you at all. My name is Nicole.
Hi, Nicole. Hi.
So I know that it's proven to be safe for mothers who are overproducing or producing more milk than their babies need to donate to other mothers who don't have enough.
Yes.
Has research been done on the healing effect of adults in breast milk if they have to view their illness?
So right now, I think people are interested in moving in that direction. Right now, my understanding, which I'm not going to pretend is perfect, my understanding is that the infrastructure for donor milk banks and milk processing and milk sharing and things like that is not of a great enough scale yet that the highest priority targets, infants and neonatal intensive care units, that their need right now is really, that the supply is meeting that demand primarily. Things get really tricky, I'll be honest. Things get really tricky about, I get so excited I study monkeys primarily, because the bioethics around human breast milk donation, or paying women for human breast milk, or gray market breast milk selling on the internet, or you know, that these are very intense ethical conversations, because there are going to be values that are going to be in conflict. Wonderful values. Protecting babies, protecting women, not exploiting, you know, class disparities. These are going to be in conflict in this dialogue. And I'm really looking forward to bioethicists becoming more aware and involved in that dialogue. Because right now it's unregulated, it's kind of a free-for-all, it's very complicated, and it gets really tricky. It gets really tricky. I mean, just talking about breast milk gets really tricky because you want to both emphasize the value of breast milk in all these outcomes, while at the same time recognizing that not all moms can breastfeed, period. There's economic, there's cultural, there's medical, there's personal, there's any number of reasons they don't have a support network in place to help them breastfeed. It's hard. It takes a lot of time and effort, and for a lot of women, it takes practice to become very proficient with it, and not all women have the same options and abilities. And so what we also owe it to them is to make a better formula. And one of the ways that we can make a better formula is better understanding what is in breast milk that is so essential for helping infants. And so you really want to maximize messaging for a variety of different people that are hearing about it. And when we talk about breast milk versus formula, it's very different in the United States, where we don't have infectious disease or unsafe drinking water. When we talk about other places in the world, formula and breast milk can become, essentially, the magnitude of the difference in their outcomes becomes much greater. The results are much more stark. And so what one would ideally do is work hard to find messaging that reaches lots of people, but one message it's not going to fit everyone. So it's a very complicated situation at all levels. Yes?
You must have written a long paper to ask for funds.
Yes.
Scholarships and grants. Do you have any advice or strategies like this paper? You can share.
Yes, so the question was, I'm going to repeat it, the question was, what are my strategies for when I approach my writing, my academic writing? So I think very hard about who the audience is. So if I'm writing an article for a physical anthropology journal versus a behavioral ecology journal versus a psychoneuroimmunology journal, let's say, the kinds of papers I cite and the kinds of words I use and the way I frame my argument is going to be different, because physical anthropologists, behavioral ecologists, and psychoneuroimmunologists are interested in different levels of organization and different aspects of evolutionary theory. So I worked really hard on thinking about the audience. And this skill I developed, I didn't listen to advice a couple years ago. And I agreed to edit a book of contributed chapters from a number of different scholars, which people tell you never do this before tenure, because it's a ton of work and you don't really get a big bump on your professional resume for it. And I was like, I want to do it. So I did it, and I use it for my teaching, and it's great, and I love it, and the book's really good. It's called Building Babies. And so it was the first time where I was an editor. I wrote a chapter, but mostly the other editors and I were really thinking about how do we get the chapters to be cohesive in a book, be complementary to one another, and reach the intended target audience of undergraduates and graduate students. And so I was managing writing outside myself. It wasn't my writing. So I could think exclusively about that reader. And then communicate what we thought would be best for the reader to the authors. And that really improved, I think, my skill set in writing my own work. Because now I think about what's the message I want to get across, who am I communicating to, and I don't think about what do I want to say. I think about how do I get the message to the target audience. One of the things that gets really tricky for me is that I write for a blog and I write academic journal articles. And the writing style for these is very different. And so I have to constantly kind of code switch between blog writing for a lay audience and academic articles that are, need to have jargon and write for an academic audience. And it can be hard to switch back and forth between those, but I'm getting better as time goes on, I like to think. Right here.
Hey, you mentioned that that during breastfeeding of infant primates, the behavior was influenced by what they were getting. And I was curious if you think that perhaps there are certain environmental stimuli for humans that may affect the rate at which we incur psychological or developmental disorders.
Yes. And it's not my research. I mean, there's lots of research on early environment and psychological consequences of that, or psychological outcomes. And it gets, I love biology, I love behavioral biology, because it's so exquisitely complex. And one of the key things is that there's this interplay between the environment and the individual. And so individuals will have certain kinds of genotypes that make them more or less sensitive to that environment that they're in. So you can have two individuals in identical environments that have very different outcomes based on their sensitivity to it. And we also have to think about, for so long, we would think of, young, mammalian young, as these passive entities, where environmental stimuli are coming, they're getting input. But the fact of the matter is that organisms are active agents in their own development, right? So they can, anybody who's ever encountered a child weaning tantrum, right, knows that those kids are very much agents in their own development because they are creating a very noxious signal to get what they want from a caregiver. And so I think that what we're finding is there's wonderful, wonderful work from like dozens and dozens of labs. I think some of the best well-known research is out of Michael Beanie's lab, looking at rodent models and looking at how mothers look and groom their young and how this affects neural networks, and then how those neural networks affect behavior, and then how that gets translated into subsequent generations. So you get these kinds of epigenetic effects across generations that are just fascinating. Because we are ethical people, we can't do comparable research in humans, and we shouldn't, right? It's terrible to do experimental research in humans. But what you're finding from the animal models and kind of things like, certain kinds of environments in humans, that they're informing one another. And we are finding parallels and bridges between animal model systems and what's going on in human health. And the fact of the matter is that we are each individually a product of our environment and our genes and our own agency. And that complexity is why we have, I think in part, such amazing individuality.
Thank you.
Question?
I have a question. Do you study breast milk in terms of mother's diet, such as omnivore diet, vegan diet, vegetarian diet, and also study physical and cognitive abilities of infants feeding on such different?
This is a great question. I myself do not, the populations that I work in, the monkeys eat an omnivorous diet. The human populations I work with are generally eating a diversity of foods. We haven't ourselves specifically looked at those. Other scholars have, and I've written about it on my blog, talking about how fatty acid content in milk, for example, differs if you're a vegetarian or vegan or eat meat. The effects seem to be fairly small, and in part that's because it depends on when you became vegetarian or when you became vegan. So you can childhood that stored fatty acids that come from consuming meat that are present in adulthood when they're breastfeeding. So they can actually still provide milk that reflects a diet that they had earlier in their life. The second part of your question was on how these things affect cognition. And there's a lot of research that looks at formula feeding versus breastfeeding and IQ, for example. Well, for the most part, mothers are self-selecting into breastfeeding or formula feeding, and there's a lot of things that go along with that that are going to influence that IQ outcome. We have started in collaboration with other colleagues and have another study. So we have a study in collaboration with other colleagues on monkeys, and we have one that we're developing with humans to look at that natural variation in mother's milk and cognitive outcome in young. But we haven't published any of it yet. We don't even have the data analyzed. The studies are in progress or in development. But I think it's a great question. Yes? And then up here in front. 1, 2.
About survey in the sexual comments and sexual harassment, do you plan any further movements about how exactly we should deal with it? Because I think a survey is only meaningful only if it can bring some actual change to not only your trainees but also the society.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And what we decided when we wrote the paper, we took to heart very strongly the work of Eleanor Ostrom, the first woman to be awarded the Nobel. Solutions are best generated within a community coming together and making decisions together, rather than having one prescribed from outside. And similarly, we anticipate that there's a lot of different field sites, there's a lot of different places, they have a lot of different structures, and we do not presume to know what is going to be the best solution for everyone. That's not, our study when we wrote it up was very clearly intending to document 3 things. 1, it's happening. We did that. 2, that the pathways, that it's happening from inside the research team. So those are the 2 big myths. It's not happening and it's not inside the research team was what people generally were saying. Not true. And then the third was, are there policies in place that people are aware of that influence behavior or allow reporting to happen? And the answer is no. There's a huge deficit in that area. So we identified that there was a problem, and then when we wrote the paper, which is open access, and we wrote it for a general audience that anybody can read it, we specifically highlight researchers and principal investigators have huge influence over the culture of their field site. And we said we need to come together as a community and affect solutions together. Since then, we've talked, we know that a number of different institutions in different ways are starting to implement responses to improving the situation. And we're just a few months out, so we are going to see how those might be influencing potential outcomes. But in terms of, does our study tell us exactly what we should do moving forward? No, it has to be a broader discussion within the community. And we challenged our community to come together and work on this. And I'm very delighted to say they absolutely are. Yeah. Question?
I wanted to know, have you looked at this women eating or animals eating organic versus genetically modified?
That is a really interesting question, and I have not myself, but I think that there are groups that are actively working on that situation. I'm trying to think if there's anything in Wilderness right now. If you email me, I'll see if I can find any studies about it. I haven't looked at it primarily. One of the things that is going on with what determines my research program is that I'm in a field of evolutionary biology, so we really need to think about, they want me to really think about things that have to do with how adaptations have been shaped and what they're sensitive to in kind of an ancestral kind of complex. And so some of these questions that are very, very, very much an issue of modern situations are wonderfully important for public health. That's not where my funding comes from. And so colleagues that I know are interested in those kinds of questions, and we all kind of carve out our own individual niches within that intellectual landscape. So we haven't started to tackle it. One of the things that one of my to those bad sites. And I said, well, that's good. But that represents a denial of opportunity. That means that there's certain sites where men can go work and women can't. And that translates into papers and opportunities and jobs and applications, and it has these kind of ripple effects. So there was kind of this, an informal protective network that wasn't really solving the problem. It was protecting individuals as best as possible, but it really allowed these things to go on in the shadows. So Kate Clancy has a blog called Context and Variation, and she had anonymously hosted 2 stories, one of sexual assault, one of sexual harassment, where people had anonymously written their experiences, and it got a huge response. And she was invited to present at a conference on these stories that people had written. And she said, these stories are incredibly moving and very powerful, but to a skeptical mind, they can be mischaracterized as an anecdote and ignored. And so she asked a group of us who wants to get involved in a systematic study of this. And Rob and Julian and I were like, hell yeah, we're there. And so that's why we started that study. And what we really found, and I didn't highlight it here, is that it's overwhelmingly happening to trainees. We're all professors. We're not the quote-unquote target demographic. But our students are. And we want academia to be a safer space for everyone. So that's why we've been pursuing it. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1.
In regards to breast milk, do you find that for women or primates, is it individualized creation before the fetus is born, or does wet nursing make a difference?
It's definitely individualized and personalized for that reproductive event for that individual infant. So the milk that comes from what we call alum maternal nursing, sometimes it's wet nursing, sometimes it's this auntie or grandmother or friend, that they are providing milk, but that it is going to reflect them and their reproductive history in a different way. But that doesn't make it bad. It just makes it different. And sometimes, like things like antibodies. Like the antibodies that you're making in your milk are going to reflect the diseases you've encountered in your life. Well, if you're getting antibodies from your mom and another individual who's encountered different things, then that could potentially have added value. This is entirely hypothetical right now because we don't have empirical data on it yet. But I think it's a great area to move forward into.
Yeah, I was just asking this, my one son, I had him wet nursed after so long,
Mm-hmm.
and the asthma that he had disappeared.
Hmm.
And so that's interesting, so part of the,
That's really, really interesting, and
if that had anything to do with it, I don't know.
I don't have enough empirical evidence to make a statement in response to that and say yes, definitely, or no, not at all. I think that breast milk is really important for immune calibration, and asthma is an inflammatory response of the immune system. So is there an intersection there? It's entirely possible. Do we empirically know about it? Not to my knowledge. 2.
First, I just wanted to thank you for speaking on the cycle of abuse that exists in our institutional systems, because I feel like the dialogue on that topic is not nearly enough.
Super retrograde.
So thank you very much for that. And then secondly, I wanted to ask, and I've made a conclusion that there might be a lack of research in the topics that you're talking about, and as far as breast milk and stuff, as far as the demographic that's making it to that level to do that research.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more on the lack of racially and gender and all that kind of stuff, and what research is lacking and what we can do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there's basically, if I had my way, scientists would have to have continuing education requirements in social science and understand what social science brings to the table, because a lot of them don't. So in that sense, social science research has shown that when you have people with diversity of backgrounds coming together to work together on solving a problem, their solutions tend to be better than the solutions generated by a homogeneous group. Right? So what that means is that more of us that are actively engaged in talking about this than I would necessarily say characterizes some of the more established generations. One of the things that my colleague John Johnson and I at Harvard talk about, so he's the first Black professor to be tenured in the physical sciences in Harvard ever, and he was tenured 2 years ago. And he really emphasizes that, you know, we use diversity as a buzzword, as though having diversity is enough to solve these problems. And the fact of the matter is that diversity is not an end goal if we aren't affording everybody equal opportunity when they get there. And so now I think the discussion is shifting to talk about how we make the climate equally welcoming to that diversity that we're so actively working on recruiting. And I would say that one of the best ways of approaching this is Project Implicit, which is Masri Banaji. She's a social psychologist at Harvard, did her postdoc at the University of Washington. And she has projectimplicit.com, and you can go there, and it basically evaluates people's subconscious biases that are operating. So how we may be more likely to associate certain races with sports, or crime, or certain genders with home, or career, or certain faiths with, you know, different kinds of attributes. People can do these. I actually use Project Implicit all the time on Facebook, where people will be coming along and they'll be like, blah, 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 but I'm not racist. And you're like, okay, well, that's great. Go to Project Implicit, find out if you have implicit biases operating, and if you don't, please come back to this conversation. Nobody's ever come back to the conversation. So I don't know if it's that they've gone and they found out something they don't want to know about themselves, or if they don't want to go along with my requirements for participating in my Facebook threads, or what. But, I mean, these are things where people need to start working harder on accessing these things that are operating in how they behave. And so I teach a class called Sex, Love, and War, the Evolution of Human Behavior at Harvard University. And one of the key things that we talk about is all the ways in which our minds are not making rational decisions. How we have confirmation bias, and in-group bias, and out-group integration, and how we don't think probabilistically, and how we, we can, how our minds have been shaped by ancestral environments that are now operating in ways in our modern environment that are causing lots of problems socially and culturally and in our communities. And most of my students are pre-med. So we talk about how these implicit biases operate in terms of how pain medication is prescribed. And we I'd like to think that forewarned is forearmed. And I know that a lot of my students take those topics away, they do further reading, and they really think about how is this going to manifest as they move forward in their careers. And I think the more of us that spend time talking about this, the better it will be. Damn, it goes slow. Much slower than we'd like. Yeah. All right, 3 and then 4.
I was just wondering if you could speak to like the social and cultural effects of breastfeeding, or like the lack thereof. Like I guess for example, I feel like my generation was like, or at least like the people I knew growing up, like largely raised off of formula, like breastfeeding, and also what maybe like the effects are of like a later development, like weaning from breast milk. Like for example, like my friend just weaned her 4-year-old off breastfeeding like this summer.
Yeah.
And my mom was like, "That's crazy."
So that's a great question, and I'm going to give you a long answer because I love this topic. So anybody that wants to walk out, feel free, kids. We are a biocultural species. Our biology is influenced by our cultural practices, right? Like if we didn't engage in the cultural practice of dairying, we wouldn't have selection favoring the gene that allows us to make the enzyme lactase, that allows us to digest milk into adulthood for populations that have that gene. So that's what I mean when I say we're a biocultural species. There's this wonderful feedback between our genetics and our culture. So the greatest living American lactation biologist is Peggy Neville. she was formula fed. And she talks about that all the time. Like, she loves mammary gland biology, she loves lactation, but she also talks about how, you know, many women, formula is really essential for them. And so then, one of the tricky things that happens is that when we think about milk as just food, then we think we can buy it at the grocery store, and then we think formula is a sufficient replacement, or an identical replacement, or just as good as, or the same thing. And so then that creates a climate where more women can use that option, and then there's a loss of cultural knowledge about breastfeeding. Breastfeeding is hard, okay? It's hard. Getting a good latch, getting good milk flow, not getting mastitis, having your baby, like, not, lose its shit, right? Like, it takes a lot of work. And what you find is that there's been, for want of a better word, we've become, in our culture, impoverished in our cultural understanding of lactation biology, which means that there is a smaller network of people to help you solve lactation and breastfeeding challenges, even though there are lactation counselors, but it turns out that finding out information from your peers is possibly even more important than clinicians for minor kinds of challenges. And so you have this shrinking network of supporters. You have a ready-to-go alternative option, and so it's changing the dynamic. And then you have people that are absolutely, I'm going to say it, rabidly pro-breastfeeding, and they talk about formula as though it's like Satan juice or something, and that's not a productive response either, right? Because not everybody has that option, and so there has to be a happy medium where we support moms and help them have more options and better support networks and better alternatives. And I mean, that's really just, I know it's abysmally inclusive of an answer, but I think I think it really is shifting culture. And so then you see that there's that shift on the back end, where you have people freaking out about breastfeeding older infants and toddlers and even children. In fact, if you look, there's NPR had a post today about extended weaning or prolonged breastfeeding, and I'm quoted in it because I was pointing out the fact that in every other mammal, in order to be able to digest milk, you have to make lactase. You have to make lactase. And in every other mammal, that the gene that regulates the production of that enzyme automatically turns off in juvenility. They can't digest milk anymore. Huh. This is why when you give milk to your cat, like, the kidney litter is a little bit different for a couple days. And so you have people that are breastfeeding 6 and 7-year-olds, and they're like, my body's making it, and the kid likes it, and it's natural. And the thing that I've kind of wondered about is the fact that are we still able to consume breast milk because we've had selection to consume dairy milk? That it's been dairy that's created this selection favoring lactase persistence. Does that mean that we shouldn't do breastfeeding for older infants? I'm not going to tell a woman what she should do with her body. And does it mean that, there's no added value? Does it mean that it's detrimental? We don't know. We don't empirically know. We do not know. You cannot do experimental studies with humans. There's no animal model systems in which you can do it because they don't have lactase persistence that long. So it's one of those things where, among other cultures that don't have access to formula or are doing natural fertility populations, they don't have access to hormonal birth control, things like that, 3 and 4-year-olds still get access to mom's breast milk. Not a lot, not regularly, and if they have a younger sibling, they're usually displaced unless they get sick or get hurt. But 3 and 4 years old is not something that we would consider to be atypical for a primate of our size and our developmental trajectory. But in our culture, people freak out. That's a long answer.
facilities. I think it's a private group.
Mm-hmm.
And they are particularly caring for drug-addicted babies whose mothers were drug-addicted. And it might be an interesting population to examine because it so much relates to behavior, biology, human behavior, rebirth, and so on.
Yeah, I think absolutely. One thing I would note, and I don't remember the name of the study, and I don't remember the name of the authors, but it came out in the media last year or the year before, which followed quote-unquote crack babies that had been born in the 80s. And what they found in a comparison control group, and what they found is that exposure in utero to drugs in a mother does not exert as great of influences as socioeconomic status.
Yes.
So what we really need to do is we need to correct the gross disparity in wealth in our society.
Absolutely.
But I think that, in terms of these kinds of breast milk-oriented questions, how we can perhaps emphasize breast milk as a way to potentially repair things, like depending on where the stem cell research goes, there could be some really interesting potentials. But I think that the economic disparity is what really needs, is the great challenge of this century. Okay, lots more questions now. 1, 2, 3.
So it seems like you really influenced for you to came to this college,
Mm-hmm.
and I when I asked about the class of humanities,
Mm-hmm.
I mean I am pretty sure that you took many humanities classes by the way that you talk and by that study about sexual harassment.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that most schools around around the world, around the United States specific, are going, humanities classes are being reduced, and most, because the thing is like it's more focused in science and more focused, in mathematics. And what can you say, for in that specific place, like what, I don't know how to say in English, but what can you say about it, to most organizations, or, for our education system, for example, about, humanities classes?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question. I did take humanities while I was here at the University of Washington. I took classes from Nada Oakley. I took her Shakespeare class, and I took her advanced English grammar class, which was really fun, although it sounds like it might not be. And I think that I think there's this really interesting complexity around the humanities in terms of our cultural discussion. So to be considered an educated person in our society, an appreciation of the arts is essential. Right? Like, can you talk about Russian novels, and do you know Shakespeare's plays, and do you understand the old white Greek philosophers? Right? That's a marker of an educated person. And you have but there's no expectation that you understand global warming, or evolutionary theory, or how vaccines work. And so in that sense, yes, a lot of universities are emphasizing the sciences because of business models around education. Where does the grant money come from? Well, grant money comes for the sciences, and that is really important for maintaining institutions of higher learning. But the cultural capital of humanities still carries a lot of prestige, and that I think is a really challenging dichotomy, because who has the luxury of studying the humanities with an expectation that they will be able to support themselves in that career path?
But that's a question too, like I always ask, because I mean, most people who had studied humanities, they are more aware, about, like you talk, for example, about, inequality in economy, like inequality, for example, and how do this, how an inequality in this country or whatever country really influence, that type of career that you get.
Yeah.
And, who get the education, who doesn't get, or the job, for example. But if we are not focusing, in this specific fields, for example, how do we really want, to...
Yeah. So I think that's also I think there's a lot of social sciences in that. And I think what you're seeing, at least in my experience at a diversity of different universities, is that they still require you to have coursework in an elective in humanities and coursework in the social sciences and coursework in the life sciences. So they still expect you to take 1 or 2 classes across this range. But I think that it's something that you have an essential tension between the economic needs of the students and the institution and the cultural valuation put on different things in different ways. And I think it's complicated. Kind of a cop-out answer, but I don't have a better one. You were 2, right? Okay.
So in cultures where breastfeeding is limited or non-existent, does that affect the milk, generations down the line or across the board in that culture?
We don't know, and that's an awesome question. I think that we don't know, and it's an awesome question. It's one of the things that we're working on in my lab right now, is we're looking at kind of intergenerational consequences, not so much of like the absence of breastfeeding, but how certain things in milk, actually we're kind of looking at, how these, so there's bacteria in breast milk. Right? So if you don't get breast milk and you get formula, then you don't get this inoculation of maternal bacteria that is sustained across lactation. You just get it at birth, unless you're born by C-section, in which case you are inoculated with bacteria in the hospital. So what does that mean when there's an interruption of this continuous bacterial transfer from generation to generation? Those bacteria that inhabit your gut, they help you digest your food, they help you regulate your immune system, and it now turns out that they release neurotransmitters that talk to your brain, right? Like, we're really basically just like robots walking around, like, eating stuff that our bacteria want. And I kind of sometimes am like, I need to go back for a second Ph.D. in microbial endocrinology, because that stuff is amazing. But I don't have time. So I think that